I am thrilled today to welcome our artist Alison O'Daniel, who's here from California, to launch what will be I think, a three-part series that begins tonight and ends, I don't know, maybe a year from now, in which we have titled this cinema residency, Are You Listening? What is a cinema residency? At the Walker, a museum that's very known for working with living artists and trying to be very supportive and generative of what their practice is, we've been trying to find ways to offer up the cinema as a space of both of enjoyment of looking at work, but also of inquiry and research and practice. There's that word again. I say that a lot. To try to think about what it is that they do and how they do it. So, part one, we're here this weekend. We're watching a film called The Tuba Thieves. If you don't know what it is, you're in for a wild ride. It is a remarkable achievement in cinema that I'm not going to say too much about it because either you've read about it or it's just fun to not know what's going to happen. Not next weekend, in a month, April 19th and 20th. Alison's going to return here because we've invited her to do some of this thinking out loud in the cinema. We're going to watch two films not made by Alison, Compensation by Zainabu Iron Davis and Code Unknown by Michael Haneke. These are films that Alison wanted to share and watch with an audience to think about what it means when people who are not deaf are making films with deaf characters and actors and subjects. And so they're two films that she thinks very intelligently, smartly engage with those subjects that we're going to look at together and think about. And then in a year, Alison's going to come back and do a performance maybe of some kind, but we don't really know what that is. But it's going to be great. And we'll let you know when it happens. So the format for tonight, we're going to watch a movie. It's about 92 minutes. After the movie, we are going to come up on stage, myself, Alison, Nyke, who's one of the actors in the film, who you've seen in many of the stills and trailers. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation. We're going to invite you to ask your own questions at some point. Hang out, talk for half an hour or so. We can talk informally in the lobby afterwards. And then my notes, give me a moment. If you've been here before, you also know that I don't like reading from notes and it trips me up. In this mode of practice, we're doing a bunch of things and we're trying to do them as best as we can do. And so I'm just going to give you an outline of some of the various supports for deaf and hard of hearing audiences and other folks that we have out for the film tonight. So as you likely know, the film is being shown. It is a film that is integrated with open captions. So there's no need to have open captions. They're always on for this film. I'll also note that for the rest of this season, up through May, at the very least, we'll see if we can keep going with this. Every film that we show, regardless of whether it's connected to Alison's series or not, is open caption in the cinema. So everything between now and the end of May in the cinema is open captioned. If that's something that's exciting to you, come back, tell your friends. Assistive listening devices are at the front desk, so I think someone may have told you about that if you need them, but if you don't, you can go grab one. The headsets can also be used for audio description. I know some folks are using that tonight. Channel A, which is the red light, is the audio description channel. Channel B is just the straight film sound. These are not playing right now, but we have captions, auto-generated captions for now. Those will also come up at the end when we're doing our post-screening discussion. Technologically, this microphone and the film sound and the listening devices, we're working on it. It'll get better at some point. But in the meantime, these are actually working really great. So, you've seen auto-generated captions. We really thank our tech team, Justin and John, who've done a lot of work to set this up, and Ethan and Joe and Lisa, who are interpreters tonight. And I'm going to invite Alison up because I've talked longer than I thought I was going to talk. But there's one quick introductory note that Alison would like to make.
Pablo, I think you'll enjoy knowing that when you said I'm the artistic curator, it said narcissistic curator. Which
I hope that got captured on it.
I was like trying to point it out to you, and then which is like, oh man, the joys of craptions never end. So I don't want to say anything really about the film. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Pablo, for making this possible, as well as the whole Walker team. And thank you for our interpreters as well. I just wanted to point out that when you came in, you were probably given a balloon. And if you can go ahead and blow it up to roughly about this size, the point of this, and also if you have a latex allergy, obviously forego this. If you don't, if your like lung capacity is, if you need someone else to blow up a balloon, I'll blow up a balloon for you. I'm sure some other people will as well. Someone can have this one. The reason, so I made a film a long time ago that I finished it in 2011, and when I showed that film, I would have balloons for the audience to hold, and this comes from this like very from this tradition basically of deaf people gathering in social clubs and watching movies and blowing up a balloon and holding it, and the membrane, the latex membrane, is so thin and so sensitive that basically all of the sound waves in the space are going to pass through this. So what I invite every audience member along the entire spectrum of deafness, which includes, I am including people who are completely fully hearing on the far end of that spectrum, to hold this and use it as like basically another speaker to get the soundtrack of the film through the vibrations. If I know that like balloons are super noisy, and that's fine in this film, that's great. I don't mind at all. If one pops, sorry, it does happen sometimes, and but we're fine. Everybody will be fine. I hope you're fine if it happens to you. And that's it. I think I hope you enjoy this experience, and I hope you enjoy the film. And afterwards, I hope you'll stay after for the Q&A, because I think we'll have a really nice conversation. I hope. No pressure. But so thank you.
Hello, everyone. Pablo de Ocampo again. I am, a short, middle-aged man dressed in way too much denim. I'm kind of up here in the middle of the stage. There's 4 of us seated around a table, and then another 5th chair over off to my right, which is, stage left for you guys, or audience left. I forget which one those are. And that's Ethan over there helping with translation. Joe is to my left. Allison is to my right. And Nyke is to Allison's right. We're going to talk about some things for a little bit, make some time for you guys to ask questions. Thanks all for coming. Yeah, the captioning will start momentarily. Like I said, a lot of systems overlaying here. They'll kick in a moment. So bear with us until they do. I think we were walking down the hallway to come here, and I was like, we have no plan of what we're going to do, which usually is like a good way to start. I'm wearing this pin on my jacket here that's got a tuba on it. Soft plug that if you want one of these beautiful pins, Allison will try to sell you one, but we also haven't set up a system to do that afterwards. Just come find us. But I was walking, in here, and my daughter, who's in the audience tonight, was like, "What's that on your jacket?" And I said, "Oh, it's a tuba. She's right here. I'm her dad, so it's my job to embarrass her." She said, I'm sorry, Sever. She was like, "Why is there a tuba on your jacket?" And I said, "Oh, well, the movie tonight is about tubas." And she goes, "Ugh, that sounds boring." And then I said, "Okay, well, it's not really about tubas," which is maybe a good anecdote and just sort of icebreaker to say this film is both not about tubas, but it also is about tubas, or it's not about tubas. And maybe that would be an invitation to just sort of ask about where did this come from and where did this begin and how did you make this film, which took you a long time to make.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question because it becomes increasingly more. Oh, so I'm Alison O'Daniel. I'm the director of the Tuba Thieves. I'm a white. Thank you. I am a white woman wearing glasses. I have brown hair and bangs. I have a hearing aid haircut, meaning that I want you to see my hearing aids. And I'm wearing a black shirt, and I don't know, mustard pants and some other clothing items. And I love that question because it's become really funny to us. By us, I mean the team, because we've been getting, reviews, film reviews, and we get like these really lovely, I mean, my mind has been blown because we've gotten all these like really lovely, very deep, very profound film reviews. And then we get these other reviews that are just like, feel that it is their job and duty to warn others that it is not a film about tuba thefts. And and so it's been like this kind of amazing experience of like, sort of the cataloging of the type of film reviewer that this film is so kind of not for. And yet I actually really do think it's a film about tuba thefts and tuba heists. And part of the reason I think that it really is because honestly, it was a very underwhelming response to this event that was happening in Los Angeles. And so the backstory is that in 2011, I had just finished a film called Night Sky that Nyke had a small role in, small but mighty and powerful and future important role in, because she came and saw the film when it premiered, and then it really forged the relationship that has built for I think we've known each other now for 15 years. And so I had finished that film. That film, Night Sky, was made with a cast and crew across the entire spectrum of deafness. Sorry, this seems like a very, very long setup. I'll try and make it really short. But I had just finished that film, and I was feeling really moved by how different all of our experiences with sound and with deafness were. Like, I am deaf, hard of hearing. I was raised in a hearing family. Nyke was raised in a hearing family. Like our experiences around deafness, I think, are just like this encapsulation of when you get a group of people together who are deaf, they have such various stories that are each so like rich and interesting. And so when I heard the story about the Tuba Thieves, it was as if like I heard the first story of, I think it was Centennial High School, which is in Compton, California, actually, they were the second school that had their tuba stolen. The first one was Jordan High School in Watts, California. And so I was like hearing these stories about these tubas that were being stolen from different high schools. And I really heard it through this lens of like, these students who are sitting there, these communities that are being impacted by this sound that's being taken away or lost or whatnot. I immediately kind of like grabbed onto this story without fully understanding why I was interested in it, but I knew that it was something about these students sitting in class without instruments, like maybe listening, or I don't know, like it was just like there was this cohesive sort of sound environment of a marching band in a classroom that's a music, class, and everybody has this sort of experience in the room that's different, and it felt to me like something to explore. I knew I wanted to tell a story that was about really the student's experience, and then let that kind of be the very beginning point, and then just drift off from there. And honestly, like the police weren't really that interested in solving these, and very low stakes in terms of like LA crime. And so I feel like by the film not entirely focusing, I don't think that the goal of this film is to do some sort of investigative research about a story, because that would be imposing something that didn't actually happen. Like it wasn't investigated. It was literally Sam Quinones, the LA Times reporter, was the only person who really was like fascinated by it. And then I think I was the second person who was fascinated by it. So like he became part of the film because I would go to these, marching bands. I would meet the band directors. I would talk to them and they would be like, oh yeah, Sam was here last week. And I was like, oh yeah, Sam's always there the week before I was there. And so it was just like this interesting thing of building a film that was really, it wasn't not about the tuba thefts, but it, like, just like you said, like it was a container to kind of deal with these in some ways hard to kind of hold on to, or hard to. Honestly, I think I just get really irritated by how much everybody wants to make a clean cut little story of people's experiences. And our experiences just aren't clean or cut.
You preempted what I was going to ask about how and when different people or elements came into it. So I was wondering about Nyke and whether that was like from the beginning, but you said that you guys have worked together longer before this film. But it feels to me that there are many people in a community that you're close to that are a part of this film. It's not traditional documentary where you're kind of coming in from the outside and looking at something, nor like a traditional narrative film where you're sort of finding people to play parts. So many of the folks in this film feel like real people, but are real people. I mean, we see Christine Sun Kim, who's an artist who I think audiences at the Walker may know. She's done things here and will do more things here in the future. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration and maybe specifically about the two of you and how you work together? That's a question for Nyke as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I'll even hand this over to Nyke, because it's interesting even to think about like Awet, who like Nyke. So Awet is the character who has his arm in a brace, and so Nyke introduced me. Well, actually, God, how do I know? So Awet's older sister Resonette. Did you introduce me to her? Did you?
Yeah, Resonette. I had introduced you to them at the museum, and we were showing some clips of this film of the Tuba Thieves and Awed's sister. Yeah, but I knew Resonette before. Correct.
Anyway, it's like a convoluted, it is, you're right. It is like, I think the deaf community, there's so many kind of like interconnections. And so at a certain point, I think Nyke introduced me to Derek, who is the skater in the film, and Awet. And so like the film it sort of was this kind of building up through relationships. So Nyke and I met through a woman who produced Night Sky, my first film, and then Nyke was just really interested in the film, in Night Sky, and then talked to me about her experiences with drumming. And then I was like, oh, I'm making this film that's, I don't know what it's about exactly, but do you want to be a part of it? Like, let's build this thing. And then many of the characters who are in this are from, like our relationship and her introducing me to different people in her life. And so it was really this, I mean, a lot of times I talk about the Tuba Thieves as a film that kind of bubbled up rather than started. I mean, it did start from an event, tubas being stolen from a high school, and then another high school, and then another high school. And then around that time, I also learned Nyke's history with drumming. And I thought that might be interesting to bring her into the film. And I asked her, I'm making this film. I don't totally know what the story is. Would you be interested in being a part of this, and us like sort of figuring out what the film is? I know it's about sound. I know it's about ownership of sound on some level. I know it's about like the loss of sound, the theft of sound. Like I knew those things. And yeah, did I answer your question? Do you want to, I don't know, speak at all about?
For the deaf community, it's very small, but at the same time, we are also quite big. And to go into depth on this, when we had met, we had that instant connection, like the past lives kinds of connection, because she has hearing loss and I'm a deaf drummer. And so there was a lot of involvement within the hearing community, but we're also deaf. So it's like, come join us, see our world, see the similarities that are within this. So within the Tuba Thieves, at the time of the thefts, I'm not sure how to explain this, but the deaf story wasn't often being heard in the right way. You know, there was this sort of theft that was happening. So I think how you addressed that and came about that was in the right way of connecting the two stories. There's definitely more to do with that, but you know, we had to juggle and try and figure things out. But you were so open-minded about finding out what this could really mean. But ultimately, the movie doesn't have just one meaning.
And I mean, also, I think very much it's a film about listening. Like, what is the act of listening? Listening as screenwriting, listening as, I don't know, a form of kind of identity formation or something, you know, like, and I don't, identity formation does not have to be for people who are, you know, hearing. So I think I was really interested in sort of this deeper investigation of what can happen if a film is like really built from a very, very, like, under many, many layers of excavation of what is listening even. I don't know how to say that. It's like such a...
Yeah, it's listening in different ways. It's not just hearing. You know, you can listen to your body, you can listen to visuals and everything. There's the deaf perspective and hearing perspective, and so everybody can listen just generally.
Well, I think that notion gets embodied in a lot of ways in the film. I mean, there's the for, you know, someone who's a hearing audience watching the film, what's really striking is how many references there are to the ways that what we hear is like confused or altered or overlaid, like the constant sort of like going through the tunnel where the radio disappears and you can no longer hear the radio, or the sort of the over saturation of sound, the planes constantly coming overhead, kind of drowning out everything that's happening. But then maybe most pointedly and sometimes entertainingly in those sort of reenactments of these three very specific musical moments, and what they suggest or mean about the different ways that people do or don't experience sound, or people do experience sound or silence. I mean, I love that sort of like reference to Prince just being like, well, Prince just knew that like everybody likes music. Everybody likes music. Just they experience it differently. Is so like, wow.
And actually, I think also what's really important to me about that scene in particular is that, you know, these students intuited that, yeah, like Prince just got it. Like he was on his Purple Rain tour in 1983, and he actually reached out to I actually don't know what the name is, but like a blind school that's next to Gallaudet, and proposed a concert for the blind college. Mm-hmm. And then Gallaudet had the space to hold it, and so they offered basically to the managers to host this concert. And yeah, that those students were just like, well, yeah, I mean, duh, like everybody likes music. It's not that big of a deal. And I think one of the things that we constantly see, and that is constantly irritating to, or at least to me, and I think to other deaf people, is this misunderstanding of like, oh my God, it's so wild to put deaf people next to like music. And it's just like, well, it's actually not, you know, like I think everybody in the deaf community is like, well, it's not really that weird. Like we're fine. We like music. We can feel it. You know, there's a lot of visual elements to music. There's a lot of like, I mean, I actually, I have no idea if you remember this, Nyke, but one time we were in like I think early development conversation and having dinner, and we were at this really, really loud bar somewhere, and I remember you were like, oh, they just turned the music down, and I had no idea, like as being hard of hearing, like my sound relationship, I was just like, I don't know what's going on in here noise wise. It was like very intense, but I think you were like, oh yeah, I just like felt it. I don't remember if it was like through your feed or something, but you just made some like very light comment about like, oh, they just like shifted the volume of the music in the space, and I think that's something that's so lost on hearing people. This whole other way of connecting, and I hope you got it through holding the balloons. That's like one little invitation into that world that. I mean, in the deaf world, what we say is this play on words of, instead of this idea of hearing loss, we use the word deaf gain. And it's a much more profound term than like hearing loss is used really as a medical term. And deaf gain is really used as a sort of like an access to culture, to richness, to awareness, to all these things. And it's just fascinating how separate like the deaf and the hearing worlds are, because I think that anybody in the deaf world is really so hyper aware of everything going on in the hearing world, but people in the hearing world really are like, whoa, deaf people in music? What? Like minds just blown, And so therefore we get these stories and these representations in film that are to deaf people extremely basic, like basic, where it's just like, come on. It's not really that big of it. I mean, I don't mean to be minimizing. Well, yeah, I do.
I'm thinking about what you were saying about I don't know, different communities being adjacent to one another, and I'm thinking about like the production of a film, which you come out of a practice as a visual artist, so you have a practice that's a bit smaller and more contained than this. And this film was over many years, and I think from what I understand through our conversations, made in a lot of different contexts, some of them very small, and I think some of them a bit larger. But throughout that, I would imagine that who we see and who we engage with in the film primarily, many or most of the folks that we're seeing on screen are folks in the deaf community. But in the behind the scenes, what does that look like, and how are you working together? I mean, just that sort of reference to like when you see representations of deaf characters on screen, they're basic. And I think what that comes from is a lack of understanding from a community about who they're working with and how they're working with that. So what are the ways that, I mean, obviously friendships like between you and Nyke were really important to building that, but in the more expansive sense of other camera people, other technicians, many other people on set as extras or whatnot. What did that look like?
Yeah, it depended. Okay, so I did make this film over a very long period of time. So we had, crew was changing pretty much every time we filmed. So technically what it looked like was that So I learned about the stories of the Tuba Thefts. I immediately knew the film was going to be called The Tuba Thieves. I knew it wasn't going to be about the thieves. And then I decided to commission 3 musicians to make me musical scores that I was going to use as sort of the first layer of screenwriting. And then I invited them. I gave them very random references. They made me musical scores. I listened to the scores. I wrote the script. I had a feature-length script. And then I started applying for grants. From 2013 to 2018, I filmed 10 short films that were sections from the feature-length script that I pulled out and just did in sections and parts. And so each time we filmed, it was different crew. Sometimes they would carry over. So over the entire project, there were 3 cinematographers that worked on the whole project. And then a lot of different, I'm trying to think of like anyone who was really consistent. There were certain decisions I made, some of which were like very long thinking. Like when we cast Nature Boy and RC, like, so Nyke's partner and father character, those were the completely fictional characters. So I was really waiting to cast those two characters until we had the bulk of the funding and finished all of the, like certain things that needed to be really consistent. I did kind of wait to bring those people in. But then on behind the scenes, it was always like a mishmash of like a lot of interpreters. Sometimes when we did the full feature filming, we had all our PAs were deaf. And then a bunch of interpreters, and then a bunch of crew that was kind of mixed. It was always sort of mixed. Like it would be a bunch of hearing people that were just like totally new to this, and then sprinkled with some deaf crew that were out there. And just in terms of numbers, obviously there's a lot more like hearing people making films than there are deaf people making films. And so, yeah, it was always kind of mixed. There were some people that carried through the whole way.
Nyke, I'm wondering about your experience working across this film, because you've been engaged in it for a number of years. When you and Alison first had that conversation, is what happened with you, your participation in the film, is it what you thought you were going to be doing?
Yeah, so when we had met for Night Sky, we had the idea for her to have a film, and she was interested in doing like a deaf vampire.
No.
No?
No. So I showed Night Sky. Nyke came to see it and proposed to me an idea of, would you ever be interested in directing a deaf vampire film?
Yes, correct. I was asking you if you'd be interested in directing that film. It was a good idea, but it didn't happen.
No. I said it was her
Oh,
idea.
her
Yeah,
idea.
not,
Sorry.
I just want to be clear
Interpreter
on
mistake.
like authorship here. Yeah.
So that's when we started that process of working together. We had the idea of there was this idea of the film, and at that time, we were filming some of my pieces, and then we would add in the other actors at the end. So we see some of these over like the years, and beforehand I wasn't pregnant. And so at the end I was. And I don't know if that was noticeable, but I mean, I see myself differently for sure. But sorry, what was the question? So within the interpreters, so did my expectations match her idea? Yes, but I think that her expectations, her idea was much more deep, much more artistic, and had a different perspective of listening to everything, because she is an artistic director. And I don't have that kind of experience. So it was very interesting for me to be able to see that process. And the movie is really inspiring. I'm very happy that it happened.
I mean, I think our friendship is really interesting because in a lot of ways we're very, very different people, but I feel like when we met, there was just this very clear comfort and like, yes, I think we'll work together, many, many times, because there is such a like deep sort of understanding of one another, which I think is a real gift, to be able to have that kind of creative experience of like directing someone and feeling so understood and so trusted and trusting, and like that is truly like a miracle of creative interaction and collaboration. And so, like Nyke read the feature script. There's many things in this film that were there from the very, very beginning. And she said yes to me, and she said yes to me over and over and over again. And as the film grew and developed and changed, it was...
I think I was also very lucky to meet the director through like the experience. Yeah, I think we've had this similar understanding and experience together. Like, for example, I've worked with hearing directors, and maybe they'll have like a fully different perspective on, and I've worked with a lot of different films within the industry and have discussions with directors, and they just don't have any experience with the deaf community. It's hard for them to understand. But when I met you, it was just like, it was amazing to work together. We had deaf crew, deaf actors, and we had all of that. We had what we needed to go forward with the film. And that was an incredible experience to have.
Well, I want to leave some space in case anyone in the audience has questions. Some ushers, I think, will come down the aisles with mic, so raise your hand. We also have, I think, cards if it's easier to write out a question. And while we wait for those folks to come down and a hand to come up, are you interested in making a deaf vampire film?
I mean, as soon as she gives me a script or whatever, sure.
All right.
I mean, absolutely. Like, Nyke can write it, and I will happily direct it, or we can co-direct it, or whatever. So.
My turn?
Yeah,
okay.
hopefully.
So mine is not so much a question as much as me being here. I mean, what I've figured out and what I know about me and the film is that I'm here to tie it all together. So I'm from Washington, D.C., and maybe 10 years ago or more, probably like 15 years ago, I took a couple classes at Gallaudet because I was interested in ASL. And then sometime after that, I met this really hot deaf guy who lived in New York. And we met in DC, and I was like, oh, cool, and we kept in touch, blah, blah, blah. Then fast forward, in 2019, I moved to Chicago. Hold on, it's all coming in good. And I'm, minding my business and all this stuff, and I'm online, and this guy's like, hey, so good to see you. And I'm like, who are you? He's like, it's me, Christopher. Remember we met at Whole Foods in DC? I lived in New York, you lived in DC. I'm like, what? And he said, and I'm actually from the Chicago area. I'm like, how? So then, just last year, I moved to Rochester, Minnesota. And I'm going to be moving to St. Paul in June. Hold on. Prince comes to Gallaudet in '83. I took a couple classes at Gallaudet. And I'm like, and then watching this movie, what I know about myself and my history is that like deaf culture has always kind of followed me somehow, and I've been able to meet and know deaf people, and I'm like, how did this little black gay kid from DC move to Chicago, keep in touch with a guy for over 15 years who is from Chicago? What? And then I come here, then I move, and here, and I'm like, oh, we should go check this movie out.
Oh my God, this person's in the movie, right?
No. And I'm like, what? And then I'm like, let's go watch this. We go check this movie out. It's about deaf culture and hearing and blah, blah, blah. And then on top of it, I'm a DJ and I'm interested in music and the Tuba Thieves. Well, these bands are having their tubas taken, and I know, as a person that knows about marching bands and black marching bands and HBCUs in particular, the tuba is really important to that sound. So you take away that, you don't have the full sound of the boom, 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 right? And so, and as a person who was in chorus and in music, you got the fact that budgets are cut and, no money for that. I was a part of a choral program. They only had one person who's going to do the teaching, so it's like all this stuff. And then on top of it, you've got sound or the absence of sound. But that this whole thing about being connected is something that I really understand, and that I was like, wow, here it is. We could all do it if we probably paid attention a little bit more to our lives. So
I mean, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. First of all, I really appreciate the way that you were with how many sort of like threads there are in this film, because I've been making this film since I started it in 2011, and it's wild how it's still hard for me to explain what the film is about. And people will be like, what's the Tuba Thieves about? And I'm like, oh God, I don't know. I mean, I've been like trying to make this film for so long, and it's about many, many things. And I think one of the things you just pointed out is one of the things that's the most important to me, which is about this intersectionality that I think in disability we're so frequently riding on the coattails of other social justice movements that have had more visibility. Like, we're always the last, but we benefit so much from the work that's been done. And so I think there's this thing that happens like within the story of this film, which is breaking off in so many different directions. There's also this very different audience experience. So if you like, what I've noticed is how differently people talk about the tuba. So if you're in Southern California, in Latinx, like Latinx culture, the tuba holds a very, very different significance to you than if you are like a white person in the Midwest who might think of it as like a polka, oompa oompa, jokey instrument. And so like in a school, it was one of the most profound things that I experienced was talking to the band director of Bell High School, Ligia Chavez Rajas, who told me that they had like a tiny little school budget. Like, she talked about how she could barely even afford dry erase markers for her school, for her band. And they completely were basically beholden to somebody in the community who donated this like very, very old tuba for the students after their tubas had been stolen. One of the students was playing a tuba that had like a big chip out of the bell, and it was held together by duct tape. And she told me the story about how they would go to away games or marching band games, and they would see the other marching bands that had tubas stolen and who had been able to replace their tubas. And within that was a story of socioeconomics in Southern California, of who has, who doesn't have, who can replace, who can't, like who has a rich school board that's able to like rally money, who has to make do with some donations of like some super heavy expense or like heavy old school tuba that had been in someone's garage for like 20 years that now some 15-year-old has to carry around. And like, it was really interesting to me, these very specific stories of these tuba thefts. And like, so I think your comment is like talking about deaf culture, but it's also talking about significance and how people see things in different ways and who hears what in what tenor, like what tone do you hear in the story, whether that's a storyline and it's your experience. And so for me, like sort of what your comment is really about, or not, I don't want to like encapsulate it because it was really broad, but I think for me, there's this like very deep resting in a sort of kind of intersectional thing where there's a lot, like this film holds a lot of different experiences and a lot of different worlds and a lot of different viewpoints. And so thank you, because that's what I heard in what you said, and it was really like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
Anyone else out there? We're a little tight on time, but get your hand up. Oh, you got one.
Yeah. I had a question about like the Mother Piece tarot deck and the palm divination cards. In particular, like thinking about the ways that the radio is always shut off, or there's these scenes of like the high school like notice signs, and you can never read the full message all at once. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about these other like ways of knowing that keep on getting disrupted.
Wait. Sorry, I heard the Mother Piece tarot deck and then the radio's
cards
cutting out.
And the radio, and I feel like that has this transfer of knowledge that's very similar to the radio getting picked up and cut off, and the ways that the texts outside of the high schools both speak to us as viewers, but also just to the student lives. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
But sorry, what's the question though? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm just curious about how like the tarot cards and the palm cards like play into the film for you, and then if that is in conversation with like the radio being turned on and shut off throughout the film, and these like just static shots of these signs outside the high schools.
The static shots of the marquees, like the marquee messages. Yeah. God, in this moment, I'm forgetting why the tarot deck was in the. Okay, I'll start backwards. So the high school marquees. I wanted to let, on some level, like give some space for the high schools to speak about loss, you know? And so this really does what I was saying earlier, like this, I think as someone who I grew up very hard of hearing in a hearing family. And so my comfort in deaf culture, like many, many hard of hearing people, like, you know, I really do see this as a fault of audiology, that audiology, the goal of it is to place people into hearing culture. There is this like line of normalcy, and that's to integrate someone into hearing culture. But what, to me, the real fault of audiology is that it doesn't also integrate me into my other half, which is deaf culture. And the fact that that is somehow okay is so egregiously wrong to me, and I think to many, many hard of hearing people. And so one of the things that I realized about this film and why this idea of the Tuba Thieves was so interesting to me was because all my life I've had this idea of loss like put on to me. Therefore, I have been forced to grieve for something that I don't think I really actually, like logically, I don't really think I need to grieve my hearing loss. Because if I had been in deaf culture, I would have been presented with actually the richness of having deaf gain. And so because deafness is a marginalized existence, it doesn't have that. The cultural value system always will have hearing as up here and deafness as below. And so for me, like the high school marquees were a space where I really was kind of joking about and talking about, sometimes like in poetic ways, sometimes in poignant ways, sometimes in factual ways, about this, what loss really is. And so, you know, one of the marquees says like, all is lost, all is not lost. And then one marquee says, my gain, your loss, my gain, our loss, their gain, whatever, you know. And then one of them says like, have you lost your keys? Have you lost your textbook? Maybe check the lost and found closet. You know, have you lost your boyfriend? Yeah. So some of it is jokey. And then one of them is like, Kendrick Lamar replaced Centennial High School's tubas. Like he was an alum of that school. He gave them back. So I was thinking of the marquees as really like the voice of the high schools, kind of talking about, you know, like these different sort of different nature of loss within of the tubas. But to me, that was really also about what it means to grapple with what it is to have a sound stolen, have a sound lost, So there's that. The Mother Piece Tarot deck, our art director showed up with that particular deck, and I was like, this deck rules. I didn't know about it until we were on set. And so that was in the script that like Nyke has learned that she is pregnant and she gets a tarot reading. And so one of the things that happened in this film was I really committed to a deep exploration of what like listening is. And so factual things that were just coming into our world needed to be integrated. And so we filmed, we raised all the money. We filmed in that period of time when everybody thought COVID was over, like before Delta. So we had this like do you remember that? Wild moment. So we had like a 4-week film shoot that was coming up, and I told Nyke, I was like, okay, we're ready. And Nyke was like, I'm pregnant. I was like, okay, huh. And so I looked at the script and I was like, okay, we're gonna write this in, no big deal. And luckily for us, I mean, I think it made the film so much richer and so much more beautiful. You know, like that scene in the end when she's talking to RC, her father, that was the scene in the script, and we just slightly added. I mean, none of the dialogue changed except for just like her pointing to her belly and being like, yeah, like I know with her things are like, all that dialogue was there. We just like slightly tweaked it to then include pregnancy, but it became so much more sort of like rich in a way. And so honestly, the Mother Piece Tarot deck was just her in this moment of like this was a fictionalized section. She had just like learned that she was pregnant and was just kind of like, oh my God, all right. Yeah, this is the fictional Nyke on top of the real Nyke. So it's just like working with what was real, kind of integrating it into the script, finding ways to sort of like show that. It's a very Southern California scene too, like the tarot reading. Maybe that's normal here too now, but sorry, long answer. I don't know if that was everything.
We are over time here. And so, but we're going to be out in the lobby. So come say hey, ask another question in the non-seated format where we're all blinded. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you so much to Alison and to Nyke for showing up at the last minute. Pleasure to have you here. And to Joe and Ethan and Lisa for doing the interpretation tonight. Thanks everybody.